Hey, hello, what's up, and welcome into this week's episode of the Geek Garage podcast, where we're going back to the movies. Unfortunately, COVID keeps us from actually going to the movies, so we're not really. The name is a lie. Everything is a lie. But this week, we are excited to be back talking about one of the all-time greats, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which turns 60 this month. 60 is old. David, that's old. Your thoughts on
Yes.
that?
60 is old. Indeed. Yes. I mean, not as old as 70,
70.
but younger. Wait, did I get that right?
But older than 50.
Yes. God, I was trying to, man, I really fucked this up. Like, you just passed it off to me for like a simple, like, yes or no fucking question.
That's how I feel about basically everything we do on this podcast. That third voice you heard was that of Miss Shauna Hoyt, joining us again because she apparently hates herself. How are you, Shauna?
I'm doing well. How are you, Ted?
Well, prepare to have that changed. Thank you for joining us again. Apparently, you can't get enough of us for God knows what reason. You are better than that, basically, is what I'm going to go with. But thank you. Like I said, of course, you were on a couple of previous episodes involving horror movies, episode number 16, which was brilliantly titled Horror Movies, and Geek Garage goes to the movies number 14, where we did a watch long on Friday the 13th. That was earlier in 2020 before shit got real.
Yeah. That was back in the glory days when all we had to worry about was teenagers fucking in the woods and making fun of them.
Those halcyon days of a masked killer in the woods.
Right, yeah.
That sounded better in my head.
Well, he's fictitious, so, you know.
Is he?
I hope so. I mean, like, I did not have Jason Voorhees swinging a ancient machete on my apocalypse bingo card. But if I need to add him, I guess I'll do that.
That was actually my free square, so I'm hoping that one comes through for me.
Well, fingers crossed for you, buddy.
Yeah, Godspeed.
Yeah.
As I said, we're here to talk about the movie Psycho, but before that, David is going to grace us, hopefully better than he did the question earlier, on some pre-roll, some events, so to speak, coming up.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, update on events. There are no events. I would normally say there are no updates because for a while things were part of the course, but then everything got canceled, like literally. The only thing that has yet to be like postponed or rescheduled is MTech. So, but we're not holding our breath. We're kind of assuming that one will most likely get postponed until next year, like the rest. And like I said, EvilCon, MomoCon, Nashville Comic Con, its inaugural year, and AkaiCon, those were all scheduled to happen this convention season, and they have all been postponed until next year. If you have been listening to the podcast for the last couple of weeks, then of course this is not new news to you. But if you are a new listener or tuning in for the first time in a while, just know that, yes, we were scheduled to make appearances at these conventions. They all got postponed until next year, but we do still have plans to attend next year. So yeah, that is a thing.
That is correct. We know you're all heartbroken because we at the Geek Garage were the sole reason you were going to any of those events.
Precisely.
So
yeah, it's
we know you're heartbroken.
Right. It's not the cosplay. It's not getting to talk to all your friends.
Nope.
It's not the
meeting people.
Nope. Right. It's not the stellar food.
It's these two dipshits right here.
Yes. It's right. Yeah. Us two bearded losers. With our buttons and our stupid ass sign.
Yeah, Shauna wouldn't have been there because she has self-respect. Moving right along, David.
A couple other things to look out for. Comic Corner. This is the blog post, the semi-regular blog post that we are starting up here soon to debut sometime this month. It's basically Ted and I picking a comic series or comic book volume, one each, and we give it our own plot summary and then kind of go into spoiler territory for people that would like to read about spoilers for that particular comic book. So be on the lookout for that coming up here sometime in the next week or so. Our Facebook group page is still active. If, like I said earlier, if you are a new listener or if you haven't tuned in a while, we just started up our Facebook group a couple months ago, where it's a little bit different than the Facebook page. With the Facebook group, you are anyone's welcome to join if you haven't already. Just search for Geek Garage listeners and fans Facebook group. I think that's the title, minus the word Facebook. Anyways, it's where all the like fun polls and nerdy conversations go down. So yeah, if you're interested in getting into heated and spirited debates, and questioning your friends' loyalty to said nerdoms or fandoms, and making them feel bad for their poor choices, then yeah, that's where it is. It's all in good fun.
Yes.
But that's where it happens.
As we've said many times before, a good chunk of the fun of being a nerd is telling other people that they're being a nerd incorrectly.
Yes, that's how to do it. So yeah, if you're interested in joining our Facebook group, feel free to search for it, click the join. There's a couple questions, or you can just DM me and I will get you added as soon as possible. We are our Q2 listener assessment that was going around is just a Google form that was supposed to end yesterday, which was Sunday, the what was that, the 7th, but we are extending it another week until the 14th. With all things considered that's going on in the news, we didn't want to promote it a whole lot, so we're basically just pushing it another week. And yeah, if you take the time to fill it out, I think Shauna filled it out, maybe this one or the previous listener assessment. It takes like 5 minutes or less. So yeah, if you'd like to fill it out, you're entered into a random drawing for a free t-shirt. I have, for shameless self-promotion, I have purchased a couple t-shirts from our Threadless shop, and let me tell you, they are damn soft. So yes, I'd like to say that you would be missing out by taking this assessment, but I'd be lying to you. So yeah. If you are into giving strangers or near strangers or close acquaintances money to pursue the things that they enjoy doing, we do have a Patreon account. So yeah, if you'd like to look us up on Patreon, we have tiers starting at $2, and we have all different kinds of perks that come with each tier, like getting to choose a watch along episode. You get a exclusive button and sticker sets that only Patreon donors get. You get early access to different content. Some pretty cool stuff. All the details are listed on our Patreon page or our website, so feel free to go to either and get more info. But yeah, that's pretty much it for all of our pre-roll content to go over. Ted, you kind of already introduced Shauna a little bit.
Stepped on the notes there. Yeah.
No, you're good. Shauna, thank you so much for joining us again. Obviously, we haven't scared you away.
No way. Yeah, thank you for having me.
We yes, thank you for coming back. We are super stoked that you are here for another horror episode. I don't know if we'll be able to get you on any other kind of episode except for when we do horror, but honestly, I'm cool with that because you always bring your A game. Ted and I are always excited for you joining us because it's always a good time, good spirited conversation. And
Absolutely.
you are, we were discussing we were discussing this earlier today, that you are kind of sort of pretty much our first three-peat guest for the podcast, meaning
Woo-hoo!
you're the first first person to come on the podcast 3 times. There is like 1 or 2 people that kind of sort of meet that criteria, but they
fell short.
They were on that little mini episode, or the episode back a couple months ago where we had like little mini segments. So that's kind of like 2.5 episodes. Yeah. So we're counting this as a full-fledged fucking 3-peat guest episode. So awesome. Congratulations.
Round of applause. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Hurrah, hurrah. Something to be proud of, I think. No, probably not. No, Ted's right. Yeah. Let's just,
moving right along.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, that is it. Let's hit the music and get this party started.
Yes.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Alright, so like we said earlier, Psycho has now been out for 60 years. It's celebrating the 60th anniversary of its premiere this June 2020, and there's really precious little that we can say about Psycho that hasn't already been said before by smarter, better people. It's tame by today's standards. I mean, you know, it just is. That doesn't make it any less of a great movie. And even though it's tame by our standards today, it's hard to imagine how lurid and shocking this would have been to the average moviegoer in 1960. It endures as a classic of cinema, a juggernaut of a film, and probably Hitchcock's most famous and definitely his most profitable. It wasn't the first thriller or the first horror movie. And like I said, there are more gruesome movies and there are more horrifying movies, but this movie endures regardless of that. It is tremendous. I mean, there's not really enough that I think any of us could say about it to glorify it. It is all that and more, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that said, obviously we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into it, all of our opinions, all the great things that we like about it, and none of the things that are bad because there aren't any. Should say to start, like I said, a lot of stuff has already been said, so we're not going to be breaking any new ground. But there will be some spoilers. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, what are you doing with your life? You have failed miserably somewhere. Rectify that and then come back. Or if you're one of those people that hates good things, you're in the right place because we're terrible. But you should still watch the movie because it's one of those. It's basically canonical. It's part of the film canon, and it's just I can't imagine being a cinephile or even pseudo cinephile and not being interested in seeing Psycho. It's
right.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I remember when I first saw this movie, and like I'm kind of glad I got to see it in the capacity that I did. I saw it in my senior year high school film class, and it was in this kind of situation where we would watch it and then he would like point out things to us, and he would also like kind of pause along the way at different important moments of the movie and explain things that were worth explaining, but it wasn't to the point of like, oh my god, like just play the fucking movie already. So I'm very appreciative at the capacity that I was able to first watch this movie. Shauna, I know that you have watched especially the older horror movies like this, from like the 50s, 60s, 70s. You had the chance to watch them all when you were younger, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, like,
Because of your upbringing and your dad, like he is a huge horror movie fan.
Yes.
We talked about this a couple times on the podcast. Do you remember how old you were when you saw this?
I don't remember the first time. I feel like the first time I was probably too young to really remember it. But probably the time that I do remember, I was maybe like 9 or 10.
Okay.
So still pretty young. Young enough to get scared. And because the Twilight Zone episodes are pretty much my favorite, this kind of lines up with that. So the black and white was right on for me. I thought it was perfect. So, but I was pretty young when I saw it for at least the first time I remember.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds about right. I feel like this, especially with, you know, your brush with very classic black and white horror movies, you know, stuff like Creepshow and The Twilight Zone, like you mentioned. I figured you probably got to see this at an early age.
Yes.
Ted, do you remember when you first saw this?
No, not exactly. The first thing about Hitchcock that I remember ever seeing was actually his television show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yes.
That used to come on like TV Land really late at night. And I used to watch that with my mom back a million years ago.
Right.
I was super into that, as I'm sure most kids were, that were into like horror and thriller stuff, like
Right.
I was. Um, and then, TCM, Turner Classic Movies, was kind of starting up as I was a kid, and that was one of the things that I really kind of gravitated towards. So I know they used to play Hitchcock movies a lot, so I'm sure I saw it at some point, probably in that same age range that Shauna was talking about, probably around 10 or so.
Yeah.
Again, I've been hitting the head way too many times to remember for sure. But, to me, we haven't talked about him on the podcast a lot, but to me, Hitchcock is like one of the top, you know, I think John Carpenter said it best, where he's just like, all of us new Hollywood brats were basically just copying Hitchcock,
Right,
Mhm.
right.
I just think that cinema is so indebted to his work, his, and not only his, there have definitely been others, but particularly, like thrillers and horror movies are so indebted to Hitchcock's work that like you have seen a Hitchcock type film whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were, I remember us talking about this, well, several times, but lately it was just the other day where, we were coming up with talking points for this episode. We were talking about how, like, just like what you said, if you are a lover of like contemporary horror and sci-fi and thriller, like stuff that has been out for the last like 10, 15, 20 years or so, then you going back and like watching Hitchcock maybe for the first time, it should feel very familiar. Uh, just plain and simple. Like, just because it has evolved so much but stayed true to that, like, aping of Hitchcock, like his source material, his way of doing things. It's um, very much like stood the test of time as great ways to shoot and direct horror movies.
Right. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Did anyone have the either the uh, okay, spoilers, like did anyone have any part of this movie spoiled for them? Like either like who Norman Bates was, the fact that his mom has been dead the whole time, just like Bruce Willis. Uh, and any part of the movie, was any of it spoiled for either of you?
No, not for me. In fact, I remember watching it with my dad and my dad not explaining any of it. So I had a lot of
Mhm.
questions.
Right.
I didn't quite understand why, the person who murdered Marion was dressed like a woman. I didn't 100% understand the whole deal until I watched it when I was a little bit older.
Sure.
Because and my dad didn't volunteer any information and I didn't ask. I just kind of took it at face value, but I
Huh.
had no heads up. So the shower scene was obviously incredibly terrifying for me. But I had so many questions that really didn't get cleared up for years. So
That's really interesting, and I mean, it makes sense because, like, you're a kid. I can imagine like having a lot of questions about what's going on, but like even at the end, like, I mean, the delivery of all the psychological information, like, why he dresses like that, um, the fact that, like, quote unquote Norman Bates is no longer a thing, it's basically just Norma Bates.
right.
Just that whole divulge of information, uh, it's kind of crazy to me to think that, like, I don't know, it's just interesting to hear that, like, after all that, like, you didn't like go back and ask your dad anything. It's but like I said, I maybe I do the same thing. Maybe I'd be kind of shy to ask questions or just be like, yeah, whatever, like. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it kept it almost like raw and innocent at the same
Uh-huh.
time, to
Sure.
see it like that because, and I saw it, I must have seen it a couple of times before I went to college because I remember being in a film class and we had to watch Vertigo.
Right.
And which is also a Hitchcock. And
Mhm.
we focused on more the score. of Vertigo, but we did talk about it a lot and the themes. And I ended up rewatching Psycho and had a totally different appreciation.
Right.
So, and I feel, I mean, I've seen it by now, maybe like 20 or 30 times. I mean, just so many. And I feel like that first time that I can remember watching it was the one where it was just raw and um, very innocent. Like it almost jaded me later on, really getting into it.
No, that's completely understandable. I mean, because rewatching it the other day, I was like, this movie really is like raw, like you
Yeah.
said. Like
Yeah.
it's got like that really gritty feeling that that a lot of like contemporary, like avant-garde, like really artsy fartsy directors, kind of bring to the table with their horror movies. Like it kind of, I feel like it went hand in hand with like The Lighthouse on a couple different levels. Uh, just I mean, and not just because of the, like the black and white element, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know, just Ted, what about you? You didn't? Did you have any parts of this spoiled for you?
No, I don't think so. And I think part of that is probably, excuse me, because the three of us are all around the same age, and I think we all kind of grew up in that era when the internet was a thing, but before it was like the thing.
Right.
And spoilers weren't really as prevalent. You had to seek them out, you
Yeah.
know, or be incredibly unlucky, really, you know.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
don't recall this movie being spoiled for me. I can't imagine it not being spoiled for people now, though, because
Right.
so much of it is like almost like mimetic, where everybody knows like a boy's best friend is his mother. They everybody knows that line. Everybody knows
Hmm.
that there's the end that we'll get to, of course, and talk a little more about with Norman just staring into the camera. You know,
Right.
there's so many of those things are like cultural touchstones almost, or cinema touchstones almost. So I consider myself lucky in a lot of ways that I didn't have it spoiled for me because it's so much more effective. You know,
Right.
like any other film or any other book or anything that is not spoiled for you. But yeah, I just couldn't imagine. Even though I've seen this movie probably 2 dozen times, like Shauna said, it's just like it still hits every time. So
Right.
I couldn't imagine hearing about it and being just like, "What the fuck," and then trying to watch it afterwards. Like that just doesn't even compute.
Right. So like I guess I'll ask myself the same question, and the answer, I don't know, maybe you guys can help me decide because I really don't know how to answer. So I would say like a little bit of both, like yes and no. Like so I spent the night at a friend's house, maybe like 7th or 8th grade, and like they had a den. I was sleeping there. I woke up in the middle of the night, and that was also like their computer room, and my friend's older brother was in there like on the computer. And of course this is back in the day, like kind of like Ted was just saying about the early days of the internet, and there's basically a family computer that
Right.
everyone had to share. And so he was on the computer, and he had Gus Van Zant's Psycho on TV. And so I was kind of like watching it to see, try and figure out what it was. And of course, I hadn't seen either version up until that point yet, because like I said, didn't see Hitchcock's version until I was in high school. But it happened to be the shower scene, and I was like, I have no idea what the hell is going on here. And then like the next day, like I was talking to my friend, I was like, yeah, your brother was watching like this really weird movie where like this chick got stabbed in the shower. He's like, oh, he was watching Psycho. And he was like, what scene was it, the shower scene? And I was like, I guess. And he was like, let's watch it again. He's like, there's butts in it. And I was like, okay. And yeah, so if you want to consider like watching Gus Van Zant's, just that one scene from his version of it before seeing the entirety of Hitchcock's version, then I guess you could say it was spoiled for me. But at the same time, like I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter, because I think kind of like I think both of you guys were saying like it's so deeply ingrained in culture that by the time you get around to seeing it, if you haven't, if you didn't watch it when you were younger, then it's kind of so ingrained in like pop culture that you already kind of know what happens. So I feel like when I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, like she gets stabbed in the shower, but a lot of the stuff that happens in the movie, I still didn't really know about. That was pretty much the only thing that I knew. So
Well, and even though that's like the main scene, there's so much leading up to that that I think is much more horrifying. Even how Norman is literally the last person that you think would be capable of something like that. He's such
right,
a like a
mama's boy.
non-threat. Yeah, he makes sandwiches, and he stuffs birds, and he's so harmless, and all of that. And so I think that's even scarier. So even though you may have seen that particular scene,
Right.
I feel like it wouldn't have necessarily been spoiled, because then when you did see it, you got to see the part that's really terrifying. which
Yeah,
is
exactly. Yeah, there is a lot of tension building up until that scene
yeah.
that I originally missed out on. So yeah, you're right, and I think that the tension building is done far better in Hitchcock's version. Obviously,
Right.
that's one thing that this episode uh, will not be, is we're not really going to touch on like comparisons between this and the Gus Van Sant remake or reboot or whatever you want to call it. Um, but yeah, Ted, what other kind of talking points do we want to hit on?
Yeah, well, real quick, I just want to kind of touch on something Shauna said about the character of Norman Bates and
Yeah.
Anthony Perkins' portrayal. In the book that this is based on, the character is very different. He's like almost a cliched version of what you would expect in like a rundown hotel like that.
Okay.
He's like short and mean and shitty to everybody. And Hitchcock changed it and cast Anthony Perkins, who had like that boyish look and just that all
Right.
shucks kind of look about him, and
Yeah.
very very handsome and things like that. So it really changed the dynamic of the character, and it is more terrifying, really, because he doesn't seem like the person you'd expect, exactly like you said. So, but once again, that's just Hitchcock flexing on everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He did do that extremely well.
Yeah. Um, One of the things that I love about this movie is that it's about voyeurism, and the film
Yes.
literally starts. The first shot is like going through, overlooking the city, and then going in through the hotel room, into
Yeah.
the window into the hotel room, where it like you literally as the viewer become a voyeur through the camera,
Right.
and that's just foreshadowing the whole film. Of course, later on, Norman looks through the window at or looks through the peephole at Marion, I should say,
Hmm.
excuse me, and that's a recurring theme that goes throughout the film, and a lot of Hitchcock's work. Really, I mean, he made Rear Window, which is literally about voyeurism.
Right.
Um, a lot of that is aided, of course, by the shot compositions, like I said, as well as the filming locations. A lot of this movie takes place in these really small rooms.
Hmm.
Starts in the hotel room, which is very small. The lobby, or the I guess reception area of the office that Marion works in, is not particularly large. Her boss's office, and then cars. A
The
lot of this movie
car.
is filmed in cars.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the hotel itself is not, or at least the parts of it that we see are not very big.
Well, and that's a really good point, because as a person who's claustrophobic like myself, um,
Hmm.
it's uncomfortable, because I think David, you and I talked about how there's we talked about before how there's just this like you're so close to the characters. There's this closeness, and
Yeah.
it's really uncomfortable, especially
Hmm.
when they're doing things that are wrong, and somehow you're right there and you're witnessing it, and there isn't anything you can do about it. And so I think the viewer feels trapped,
Yeah.
which makes it also incredibly scary, because you're seeing it happen and it's happening right there, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Right. Yeah, like there's a lot of tension building just by creating like physical closeness
Right.
between characters. Like when I'm forgetting the characters' names, but it's Marion's sister and Marion's lover. They pretend to be the married couple, and they go to check out the Bates Motel, and it's that particular scene where he's like, hey, you go and check out the house, and I'm gonna try and distract Norman. And so he's like, hey, you got a second to talk? And they are standing ridiculously close together, and I'm just waiting for like a stabby or something. But yeah, like just scene after scene like that in this movie just works wonders with like tension building, and exactly like you said, Ted, with everything taking place in such like close quarters, like in vehicles, small offices, small hotel rooms. Like, yeah, that's just one of the thousand things that Hitchcock was known for. Is just a master of building tension.
Well, and even
Yeah.
when oh, sorry, Ted, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, they called him the master of suspense for a reason,
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
absolutely. Right. I was just going to mention another element of the closeness, which I didn't really notice it as much until I was a little bit older and I'd seen the film a couple of times. But the deputy or local cop who's, following her
Yeah.
around, even when he's following her after stopping her, and even right before stopping her, he's so close to her, and we see him through her rearview mirror, and it's almost like he's practically in the car with her, and he is kind of following her around the town, but it is so unsettling. And so not only are we looking at Marion driving and feeling that closeness, but then we also have a sheriff right behind us so I feel like we're almost trapped when we're watching her life, this moment in her life.
Right. It's a really good like setting the scene for the viewer, like putting them in the position of Marion, where she makes this decision to up and run with her boss's or her boss's client's money,
Right.
and the paranoid feelings that come with that. Like, he just does a great job of like setting the scene to put you in the place of her, because like you said, with the police officer, like, and does he even like come back ever, like after that part? Like, I don't remember seeing him ever again.
I think, did we see him the last time at the car dealership?
Yeah, as she drives off, he's standing there talking to the
Right.
car salesman.
Yeah, that's the last that I remember of seeing him. I can't remember if there's a scene maybe with him and the private detective.
No, I don't think so.
But yeah, yeah, that's yeah, crazy.
And I have to say, I did think I remember thinking when I saw the movie for the first time that I can remember, that he was going to somehow come back, be reintroduced in the movie, because he did seem to have such a creepy, critical role, that he could come back, and that he was going to be the one that was going to be stabbing someone in the shower.
Right.
He doesn't. So it kind of throws you off, but he had such a important role.
Yeah.
So I thought he was going to have a bigger one at the end, but not at the end, but later on. So.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And a couple other things that play into the tension that maybe are not as well. One of which at least is not as obvious. The first one I'm going to mention that's super obvious is Bernard Herrmann's score, which is just like
Epic.
well, yeah, I was going to say just like very eerie from the opening credits, like the Soul Bass credits start rolling.
Oh yeah.
And then Bernard Herrmann's score comes in, and immediately you're just like, ugh, like it just kind of makes you shiver, and it's like it seems off in some way.
Yeah.
Right. It's just so unsettling.
And that's, of course, before you even get to the iconic like shower scene that's been
right.
That musical cue has been aped innumerable times.
Yeah. Yeah, his did you mention that the score was comprised of like 100% string instruments? Like that was the only thing that was used?
Um, I'd never really thought about it, but hearing that and then thinking about the score, it's pretty obvious that yeah, that's the case.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, Bernard Herrmann, like hats off, brother. You fucking killed this.
Well,
Um,
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, that's all.
Well, I was gonna say he was a pretty legendary film composer anyway, and a really funny like trivia tidbit about this film is that Hitchcock originally envisioned the shower scene as being silent,
Yeah.
and then Herman was just like fuck it and scored it anyway. And Hitchcock liked it so much that he ended up doubling Herman's salary for the film because he was like, I think I think the famous quote is something like 30 or a third of the film is, or a third of the film's effectiveness at being scary is because of his score, which
Right.
is not inaccurate.
Right.
Absolutely. Shauna, you actually had a bunch of really cool trivia that you pasted into the notes that I would love to have you read over. And I know a couple of them actually are kind of particular to what we're discussing, or at least parts of the movie that we're currently discussing, like the shower scene and all that. Um, do you want to go over those now?
Yeah, sure. So, well, while we're on shower talk slash
Mm.
bathroom talk, one thing I found very interesting, and I guess I didn't, I mean, I never thought about it before, but the presentation of a toilet in American film, that this was the first American film to show a toilet and to have it flush, which I found very interesting. Um,
It is
because
pretty interesting.
it is, but the way do you remember the flushing of the toilet, David or Ted? I'm not sure if it
So
stuck out.
yeah, I actually for some reason remember it kind of clearly. I mean, yes, I watched the movie just like, a couple days ago, but like for some reason it sticks out in my mind. Maybe because it was like a really gross looking toilet. Uh but yeah.
Well, and you literally see like the vortex of the water in the
Mhm.
toilet bowl, and I think that kind of goes back to when Ted talked about the very voyeuristic themes that are in Psycho, and how and eyes, an eye, and it's sort of the eye of this little vortex in the toilet, and
Hmm.
so even the toilet is almost watching, which, I don't know, maybe that's really weird and maybe that's stretching it, but in my head, the toilet
It's
is also watching.
No, that's definitely interesting. I never really thought to kind of look at it that way, but that's definitely an interesting um perspective.
So
Yeah, that the flush, and then later we see that same sort of phenomenon with the shower as everything
yes,
goes down the drain,
yes.
Mhm.
um, which I always thought was significant in some way. Like I don't think Hitchcock did anything on accident.
No.
Right.
I think that like many other directors, he was very particular and very deliberate with what he did. So I always assumed, and maybe this is me looking too deeply into it, but I always sort of thought that the toilet flushing, that vortex, like you said, was just kind of significant in that it's basically Marion's life, like rapidly spiraling down,
Right.
whether
Yeah.
she knows it or not, whether we know it or not, really.
And to that note, Norman's as well, because that's when
Yeah,
we lose Norman and we gain Norma, and so his identity as Norman is also spinning out of control. So I totally agree with that. And yes, Hitchcock doesn't make mistakes, and I think things that he did were very, very deliberate. We just may not understand it all. So,
Yeah.
but so the toilet, this glorified toilet.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that toilets were such a big deal on film. Um,
well, I mean, again, consider the time that this film came out, and um, things were a lot more conservative
right.
in the
Mhm.
sense of, in the true sense, not a political sense. I think it was just shortly before this that like you couldn't show a married couple in bed. I know on I Love Lucy, Ricky and Lucy have separate beds even though they're married and they have a child.
Right.
They have
Right.
separate beds because it was just like it was scandalous.
Right.
It was just a different time, really.
Right.
Wasn't Bert and Ernie the first like quote unquote couple to be portrayed in bed together on TV?
That I do not know.
For some reason, I thought I remember hearing that as like just a pop culture trivia factoid. I could be wrong, but I feel like it's that, maybe that or I Love Lucy.
But I know that the toilet we talked about. Obviously, all the stuff with Norman and Norma. This movie, Hitchcock was just like, fuck it, and just pushed the envelope as far as he could.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is, it's insane in a way that this movie is was as popular as it was. Like I said, this is Hitchcock's most profitable film.
Mhm.
And you think just like how shocking this would have been, like I said, to the average moviegoer in 1960. So it's almost it's kind of crazy to me in a way that it was so popular and so profitable because of how shocking it was or must have been.
Right. Yeah, like didn't it get like a theatrical re-release like several years later down the road? Like I think in maybe 68, and it made even more money then.
I'm not 100% sure about that. I do know that back in for a long time, before VHS really, films had much longer theatrical runs.
Mm-hmm.
So this could have been in theaters for like a year, you know.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I do know, speaking of re-releases, that assuming that theaters are back open, this is supposed to have a 60th anniversary showing in October, November, I believe it is, which I was very excited about and still would like to see happen. But
Yeah,
you
that
know,
would be great if
Yeah.
we could, have theaters like be open by then. That would be most excellent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Hitchcock pushing the envelope, that's one of the reasons that the studio was like, no, we don't want to do this because, it was shocking to them too. He's coming off North by Northwest, which that was the movie he released previous to this, if I
Mhm.
recall correctly, which is like a spy thriller,
Right.
Then he comes in, he's like, I want to make this movie about a dude who kills women, and the studio was like, what the fuck, man? No, it's not the 70s yet. We can't do that. And so to get it financed, he was like, I'll put the money up, but I want the back end. I
Uh-huh.
think it was something like 60% of the film's profits is what he said he wanted to direct it.
Yeah, it
And
was a
since the
decent
studio
chunk.
was like, well, this is going to be a giant disaster, sure, knock yourself out. And of course, it went gangbusters. So Hitchcock made a fortune off of it.
Yeah. He also like had he could be considered like a pioneer in like early movie marketing, because the marketing for this movie was stupendous.
Oh, exactly.
Like the fact that he would not let people show up late to the movie, like you had to be in your seat by the time the projector started the movie, so you couldn't walk in late. You couldn't, I don't know if there were intermissions or anything, but you couldn't walk in the side door like with a brand new ticket to go in and watch it, halfway through. You like, there was very strict rules that he put in place, and he like apparently went to like every single theater operator and owner and made them swear like on death of their own death that like they would not let anyone in after the movie started, because he didn't want anyone, or he didn't want the reveal spoiled, because it happened so soon in the movie. It's basically still within the first act of the movie, basically. At least at the ass end of the first act. And there's just, several other pieces of marketing trivia for this movie that are just super interesting.
Yeah, definitely agreed with the marketing and even the tagline of like the theaters won't let you in late, but you'll never want to leave after
Mhm.
seeing it.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think he had like cardboard cutouts of himself, like life-size cardboard cutouts, like in the theater with like a pocket watch or something like that, where to like remind people to like hurry up, get your fucking raisinets and get your ass in the seat so you don't miss the movie. Um, just crazy shit like that. But I mean, it makes sense the extreme length that he went to because of all the extreme lengths he went to during or before and during the filming of the movie. Like he bought like all the copies of Psycho the book, so that like right when the book came out, like the book had just been released like on bookshelves, and he purchased the rights, he bought all the copies because he knew like right then and there he wanted to make a movie out of it. And he knew that he wanted like that big reveal to be pretty similar to the book, and he didn't want that surprise spoiled for everyone, so he like bought all the copies of the book so it couldn't be spoiled for everyone. And that just like I think that's one of the little pieces of trivia that just blows my mind the most. Completely crazy dedication.
Yeah, and it's sort of, I don't want to say it's passe now, but it's been done a lot
Mhm.
in the ensuing 60 years. But like killing your star an hour into the film is that was like
That's a no-no.
Yeah,
that had to be insane.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
right.
don't forget, I mean, Hitchcock, he knew his audience. He knew his films. He knew his audience. He knew his actors. And only Hitchcock could fill Hitchcock's shoes. So I truly believe that because he doesn't make accidents or make mistakes in his films, he was a control freak. And I think he wanted to control every aspect of that experience. And he was successful.
Mhm.
And so you got to give him credit. I mean, his the arrogance or the forethought or whatever you want to call it, it worked. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100% with the control freak aspect. He's pretty infamous for that. That's one of the reasons that he filmed this with a lot of TV crew, predominantly who had worked on his show Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
mhm.
Part of that's also because of the budget. You know, he couldn't afford a big fancy film crew, so he had a TV crew come in, basically a bunch of ringers instead.
Mhm.
Um, but also, I mean, he didn't give the whole script to everyone. Like, he
Right.
didn't even let anyone know the end until they filmed it.
Yeah.
You know, so but again, that's because, like you said, he went to such great lengths to make sure that it wasn't ruined. That this was also, I don't know if it was the first movie that had this sort of marketing campaign, but it's the first one that I'm aware of that did so, where he was like, "Don't spoil the movie for other people.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that makes you a shitty person," and it does.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right. Um, I so I I think both of you guys haven't seen the movie Hitchcock, correct? The one that came out in 2012 that had Anthony Hopkins and Helen Mirren.
Right. No.
No, I have not.
Okay. So if for you guys and anyone else listening, all three of you, um, if you want to learn a lot more about like the trivia in like movie form, go watch Hitchcock. It's, I mean, you'd have to, pay for the rental or whatever, but it is available on Amazon Prime. Um, Anthony Hopkins does a fucking bang up job as Alfred Hitchcock, and of course Helen Mirren just fucking kills it as well. But they they bring up a lot of the really popular movie trivia behind Psycho into this biopic. One of my favorites is like the shower scene, like the shots of Marion Crane screaming. That was actually Hitchcock like like play trying to stab her with a knife. Like obviously when it um cuts to Anthony Perkins' character, that's still him, but her reaction shots, are actually Alfred Hitchcock, because like he tells the camera crew to keep rolling because he's not getting the reaction out of her that he wants, like that, freaking out in the shower. So she's not really ready to start filming yet. They don't know that they're rolling, and he rips the shower curtain and just like, starts to act like he's actually going to stab her to get that freaking out reaction. And yeah, that's just one of like the many little trivia factoids that you get in this really cool biopic. So I definitely suggest it if you're a Hitchcock fan or a Psycho fan or both. Yeah, it's definitely great. All right, what else do we want to talk about?
So much. Do you want to go? Do you want to talk about performances, or do you want to talk about scenes first?
Scenes
Scenes.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
200.
that sounds good. Yeah.
All right. Well, Shauna, you chose, so take it away.
Okay, so just any old scene, or
I mean, whichever one you want. I mean, I feel like we have to talk about the shower scene, but that's obvious.
right?
So if there's something else, like there's a couple of different scenes I want to talk about. That among them, of course. But if you brought it up, so I'm guessing you probably had one in mind as well.
Could talk about where the private investigator falls down the stairs.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, we already threw out the spoiler alert.
Did we?
So yes.
Yeah, we're safe. We're not breaking the laws here. We're good.
Yeah. Breaking the law.
I mean, I guess my favorite scene is really when Marion is at the car dealership.
Really?
And she's trading in her car. And if anyone has ever been to a dealership, whether it's a used car dealership or not, and you're getting a new car, I mean, it was so incredibly awkward, that scene.
Oh yeah.
I thought the car dealer was just going to pull the plug on the whole thing. She was incredibly nervous. I think, which was probably unusual at that time, but a woman who literally walks in and says, "This is the car I want. I'm selling you my old car. The proper paperwork is in the glove compartment. I'll give you cash for the difference." I cannot imagine that happened very often in 1960.
Yeah, just like within the first like 3 minutes, there's like a billion red flags.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, you can tell the character's written to be like taken aback by this, because he's
Right.
just like almost begging her to like haggle.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Haggle.
normally this is the first time I've ever had a client try and rush me out of here,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
And he's got that kind of aw shucks good old boy
Yeah.
about him.
Yeah.
And he has no idea that like he's dealing with somebody who just stole $40,000.
Well, absolutely. And I think his character, he starts off in this like typical used car salesman fashion, like, "Oh, hello, I'm going to, try to sell this woman a car, take advantage of her, whatever."
Right.
And it's almost like at the end of the scene, you feel sorry for him, and he almost seems violated, like as if there was some sort of an assault on him. And I just find it really interesting and really unsettling. And then it's made just compounded by, the sheriff or the deputy showing up,
Right.
and sort of confirming his uneasiness or validating it. But that just their interaction is so uncomfortable, and there's no way that ever happened. It wouldn't happen in today's time, let alone
Oh yeah.
in the 60s.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, I don't know. I've never looked at it from that perspective before. Shauna, a couple of things that you were saying, but I will agree and echo like that entire scene could be the most uncomfortable moment or scene in this entire movie. Like it
I
is so
think so.
uncomfortable.
It is.
Yeah.
For everybody.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. For us, the viewers, for the characters in the movie, just like it's so rushed. And like every time he tries to like, get her to he's not even necessarily like prying, like I'm on to you, like I know you're up to no good. Like he's like I mean, maybe you guys got that vibe, but I didn't even really pick up on any kind of vibes like that he might have had. You know, it seemed like kind of like what you said, Ted and Shauna. Like he was just plain old simply taken aback. Like he doesn't know what the hell is going on because this has never happened before. He's never had someone come in and offer to pay full price for a car. So yeah, it's just that whole scene so incredibly fucking awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Shauna raised an interesting point where she said, keep in mind this is a woman in 1960 doing this, which
Yeah.
would have been unheard of. So I think that took him aback. He was probably thinking, maybe not take advantage of her necessarily, but thinking, oh, well, she's going to come and look at the car and then she's going to have to get her husband out here.
Right.
Right.
Not saying that's right, just saying that that's very much how it was in 1960.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes, that's how things were done. We're just reporting the news to you folks. We're not we're not
I'm offering a judgment. I'm just saying.
No, we didn't make
Yes.
history. No.
Yeah.
But
I am
and
ashamed of my ancestors.
as
All
you
right,
should
reel
be.
it in there, white guilt.
But and the scene is lengthy. I mean, it's not
Oh
like
yeah.
this. The transaction happens quickly. You know, putting it in perspective, but it's a long scene, and it's so you want it to be over, but not, and it's just I don't know. So that one always really bothered me, in a good
Yeah.
way, but
It's very effective, and even when she goes into the restroom, you're like, oh my god, we're gonna get a moment of respite, but
right,
no, you don't, because she immediately like looks into the mirror and then is just like, oh, I'm a dirty person, like,
yeah,
and then she's counting the money, and it's like, oh, it's gross here too, it's just
yep,
that there's no, you don't get a breath during that scene really.
yep,
Right. Yeah, I read one other interesting trivia factoid is that when we're first introduced to Marion, she's wearing white lingerie,
Yep.
mhm,
and then the next time we see her, down in her, her dirty bits, she's got black lingerie, and that's supposed to like symbolize like I guess turning to the dark side or
yeah,
deciding to take that step into the, you know, the realm of, being an outlaw.
yeah,
I thought that was a very interesting choice of aesthetics.
And if you pay attention, her car goes the other way. She trades in her black car for a
Yeah.
white car to appear
Yeah.
more innocent.
Hmm.
right. So
Yeah.
outside versus what's going
Yep.
on the inside. But she's a fallen woman. I mean, at this point, and she made her choices, and she goes all in. Like this
Yep.
is this is what I'm doing, without really looking back, until later.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ted, do you have a favorite scene or a couple scenes from the movie?
Yeah, a couple of them. And like I said, we'll definitely get to the shower scene. I feel like we all have a lot to say about that, even more than we already have. But some other maybe less appreciated scenes, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is a very simple one. It's when Marion goes to check into the hotel. And as she's checking in, you can almost see Norman Bates kind of deciding what he's going to do. Um, if you pay attention as he goes to get her room key, he goes for just a random room,
Yeah,
like number 10 or something. I can't remember what key it is actually, but it's a room that you assume is safe because it's not right next to the office.
Right.
And then when she lies and says um, she's from Los Angeles, he goes and grabs the number 1 key.
right. Like she committed, like she failed his test or something.
Yeah. That's almost kind of what it seemed like, exactly. And it's just a great, like, at the time, viewing it for the first time, you don't really understand that. You just think, oh, he's thinking, oh, why the fuck would I put her way down here? Number 1's open. And then as you watch the movie and it all comes together, you're like, oh shit, that's the moment it started.
Right. Yep.
So I always like that one. There's a quick. This is more of a line, I guess, than a scene itself. But when you first hear the voice, excuse me, you first hear the voice of Mrs. Bates, or what we think is Mrs. Bates. It's very, very masculine. It's very deep. And then the very next line she speaks is down to that more feminine, higher pitched voice. So it's almost like a little Easter egg or foreshadowing that it's Norman. You
Right.
know, I just actually caught that on this most recent watch that I did a couple of days ago. Um,
Well, and that's a good point, because one of the factoids that we had here was that Hitchcock chose and used three different actresses to create Norma Bates.
mhm,
He wanted the perfect voice for each scene, and one woman couldn't do it.
right.
So that says a lot too, because that means that he intended the voice to be different. That was very intentional and important to him enough to hire three very different, voice actresses.
Mhm.
So,
And I'd have to go back and check, but I believe on the opening credits, only one woman is listed as Norma Bates.
oh,
Hmm.
really?
I think so. I believe I can't remember the actress that's credited as Norma, but I believe there is an actress that is credited as playing her in the opening credits. Like I said, I have to go back and double check, but I believe that's correct. Um, three more quick ones. The Abergast death scene where Norman rushes, it just like bum rushes him, is fucking horrifying.
Yeah,
Um,
that point of view shot from up above, like the camera is like shooting down from the ceiling.
yeah,
It's so disturbing.
it is, and like it's made even more terrifying by the fact that Norman rushes out in such a weird, like gangly way.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't do anyone any favors how he's, just very lanky and, very tall and just very spindly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course the look of like shock as Abergast falls back, and
Yeah.
we can make fun of like how he looks falling back. It was 1960. You got what you
Yeah.
got.
It's, yeah, product of its time.
Yeah, that's like even just thinking about it, I have like a chill. Um,
Yeah. Same.
the reveal scene where the sister Crane goes down and of course the corpse spins around and she's like, "Ah!"
Right, right.
Right.
and Norman rushes in is just like that look on his face and the way he says I'm Norma and
Uh-huh.
that shriek is like so unsettling.
Yeah.
So I almost kind of want to take it back when I said there were movies that were scarier than this because even thinking about it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, this movie is like deeply unsettling
It really is.
in a way
Yeah.
that a lot of horror movies like they just don't ever reach that plane.
Yeah, like I remember watching this the other day, and like I texted you, and I was like, "This movie fucking owns." Like,
Yeah, it knocks.
yeah, like I didn't tell you that I had just watched the shower scene, but that was the scene that I just watched when I texted you that, and you were like, duh." And and then like the very next night you watched it, and you like texted me at that exact same moment where you were like, "Dude, this movie owns fucking every other horror
Yeah,
movie in
it's
existence."
just like like I said, there's a reason that it still gets talked about 60 years later.
Exactly. Yeah.
One more, and then I'll turn it over. I'm talking too much, but the very end scene with Anthony Perkins just kind of staring into the camera.
Yeah.
There's a split second. I'm convinced of this. I'll go to my grave believing this, but I'm convinced there's a split second where they superimpose the corpse's face over his.
They did, didn't they?
I I looked and I couldn't see it or find anything. I didn't look that hard.
Now
I did
I
but I'm fairly
remember.
certain that just for a couple of seconds they have that.
Yeah, it is not very long. It's maybe it's got to be less than a second, but yeah, it's there. It did you watch the version, the Amazon, the where you can rent it on Amazon Prime? Is
Yeah,
that how you? Okay, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I was like I had remembered that from the last time I watched it, maybe a couple years ago, and I was like, did I remember that right? Was that a thing? And yeah, like I remember seeing, like you said, the her skull like superimposed on his face for just a split second. And then that following scene, Ted, I'll let you finish up if you had anything else to say.
No, I was just going to say that, I remembered that it ends with the close up of him, and it's got the voiceover of Norma saying, "Oh, well, they'll never believe it was me. They'll look and say, oh, well, she wouldn't even hurt a little fly,"
Right.
um, which is creepy enough. And then, like, I was only sort of halfway paying attention. I was like taking notes, and I looked up just at the right time. And I was like, "Oh my god, fuck this movie so hard!" Just it catches you off guard. Um,
Yeah.
which is a good reaction, really. I mean, it's a
Yes.
thriller, it's a horror movie. That's what you want.
Right.
But yeah, it's a classic for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, so I mean, I'll echo like all those scenes that you all have mentioned. They're all fantastic, and I don't want to reiterate anything because it'd just be wasting time. And you guys already said them fantastically enough. So just going in progression from Ted, the scene that you just mentioned, the very last scene, which isn't very long. It's just a couple second cut of them pulling, I guess it's the police or maybe a tow truck or whatever, you don't know who it is, pulling Marion's car out of the tar pits or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Like, and the score, just the mix of everything, like the score, the scene itself, the fact that it's not very long, and the fact how it actually says like the end in the bottom left hand corner, like, is just, in my opinion, a perfect way to end the movie. Like, I can't even explain why. It's just a great fucking scene to end the movie with, like just pulling the car out of the tar pits. Like it's almost like uh not having to force your viewers to go through that emotional moment where, like, your family members have to bear witness to Marion's corpse being found or whatever. So it's kind of leaving that to the imagination. So I think that kind of plays into why I like that so much, and how they didn't really make it part of the movie, like discovering her, her remains. So yeah, that scene's awesome. I guess we can kind of segue into the shower scene now. I mean, I know I talked about a couple of other scenes here and there, but sorry, Ted, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say, one thing that the final shot always represented to me is, like, you see that white car coming up and all the muck and swamp shit falling off of it,
Mhm.
and
Right,
it's almost like, okay, now the truth is coming out. Now all the secrets have been revealed or are being revealed,
right.
and it's just like, did we learn anything? Yes. Did we want to? No, not especially.
Well, I mean, and it comes right after we've spent, I mean, it's so uncomfortable to sit there and watch and stare at Norman. We watch him watching us for like what, 30 seconds,
It's
40
a long
seconds.
time.
It's a while. And that is, if you've ever played the staring game with somebody, like
Mhm.
whoever looks away first or blinks or whatever. I mean,
Or
that's what it
laughs.
almost, right, or laughs. That's what it almost feels like. Like we have this really intimate moment with this completely psychotic person, hence psycho, and like, and then we go to the car. And I feel like as a viewer, you're so unraveled and like emotionally just thrown around at that point. And then
Yeah.
we finally have some sort of closure, but it's still not enough because they're not going to find her,
Mhm.
right? I mean, there's still so many questions that are unanswered. So
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think. Do you want to talk about the shower scene now?
yeah,
Yeah,
let's talk about the
let's do
shower.
it. Yes, jump into it. We've teased long enough.
Yes. Um, I mean, I think it's understating it to say that it's fucking horrifying.
Mhm.
Um, a funny but not funny piece of trivia about this is that Janet Leigh, who played Marion, the famous Scream Queen, of course, she said that, when we filmed it at first, it didn't really bother me. And then she said when I watched it with the score, it like deeply affected me. And she never took anything but baths after that.
Yeah.
Like to the day she died, she never took another shower. It was always baths.
Yeah, I did read that, and that's some powerful shit.
And
Well,
I can say now I'm an actual giant, and I'm in my 30s, and for the last probably 20 plus years that I've seen this movie, every time I go into a bathroom, I open the shower curtain. That's
just
the
in
God's honest truth.
case. Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
you're the most vulnerable. Wait, I mean, you're literally naked in the shower. I mean,
Right.
you couldn't be more exposed, really. And that's when it happens. I mean, it's horrifying, and it's something we all do. Most of us do, so we can relate to it, right? Taking a shower,
right.
and just to have that kind of horror happen when you're vulnerable, when you're trying to get clean, when you're trying to, when you're at your most exposed, is the most violating thing, really.
Yeah, and I think a good place to start is the beginning where we see the door open, and Ted and we were talking about this the other day as like just the most fantastic way to like start this whole sequence, and how fucking horrifying it is to like have Marion like facing us, or basically like facing the shower wall.
Right.
So her back is completely turned, and then we see the door open and a figure standing there, and we're just like, oh my god.
Yeah. It's just like so unsettling.
Yeah. Well, again, the viewer is seeing the entire thing happen, knows what's going to happen, because what else could happen when a
Mhm.
shadowy figure comes into
Exactly.
your
Nothing
hotel
good
room?
comes out of that situation.
Nothing good,
Yeah.
right? Definitely. And there's nothing we can do. We're right there. We're in the shower with her, and there's nothing we can do.
Hmm. And it's just at this time you don't know who it is. I mean, I think that a pretty educated guess would be, oh, it's Norman. Who the fuck else could it be? But I mean, you talked about it earlier. Could it be that sheriff? He was creepy.
Right.
Could it be any number of random townspeople? Could it be the used car guy?
Yeah.
It's just it's deeply unsettling. The fact that we don't really know who it is worse, of course. But it's just to me, the thing that makes the scene so great is that it doesn't give anything away. It's all the power of suggestion, right?
Right.
There's one split second shot that you see the knife actually pierce flesh. Other than that, you don't see that happen. It's not gruesome like a lot of modern horror films are, where it's just like
Right.
more blood, more guts, more gore.
Right.
Right.
That's not
Torture
scary.
porn.
Right. That's not scary. That's just gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like a lot of movies like that. I'm not trying to say that they're not effective. I'm just saying, from a horror perspective, blood isn't scary,
Right.
Right.
right? Or just there being blood isn't scary. This is so effective because it's just the power of suggestion. All you have is the atonal shrieking chords, Marion shrieking, the flashes of the knife, her struggling and failing because what's she gonna do? She's soaking wet in the shower, nude,
Yeah.
And I think it almost makes it worse that you don't see any, no pun intended, penetration.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's just like it's happening, and your brain knows it's happening, but you can't see it, which in some ways, like I said, just kind of makes it even more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we were talking about earlier how they use chocolate syrup instead of like fake blood, because what you said, Ted, it just shows up better in black and white.
Yeah, it looks better than stage blood in black and white. A lot of movies have done this. A lot of black and white films, of course, have done this. I think Raging Bull is probably the most famous one, where
Okay.
Scorsese used a lot of Hershey's syrup in that film.
Yeah.
But it looks better. It's got a thicker consistency. It shows up in a more stark contrast, so the darker color of the brown shows up better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, that's something that I wouldn't even have thought of, like in the filmmaking world. Like it seems like one of those things where you just have to learn the hard way, where you like go and make some fake blood, and then you go and film the scene, and then you're looking at the dailies that later that night, and you're like, this fake blood looks like shit. Like I worked really hard on that red corn syrup. And then you're like, ah, fuck, like, well, it's just not contrasty enough. What are we gonna do? And like, then just cut to the next day, like making a trip to Kroger, like buying all the Hershey syrup that you can find. But yeah, that's just a look inside my fucking dumbass brain. Ted's like, he's silent because he's like, again, this is why we don't hang out very often.
Well, the other thing about that, I'll move on from that. The other thing about that, the shower scene when we see Marion getting murdered, is when we do see that it's a woman, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, how taken aback must the audience have been at that point? Because what woman, especially an older woman, kills another woman? I mean, what?
Mm-hmm.
That blows my mind too, because we assume it's a man who's going to break into a hotel room and kill someone in the shower. Why would a woman do that? So that makes it even worse and scarier, because, man, I mean, you talk about I'm vulnerable and now I'm being murdered by an older woman. Yikes.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's safe.
Right. Yeah. I feel like logically you should be able to put together, like put two and two together and be like, oh, it seems like if it's going to be anyone, if it has to be a woman, it has to be Norma. It has to be Norman Bates's mom, because we see her at the very beginning, or when not at the beginning of the movie, when she pulls up to the hotel and she's looking for someone, and I think she sees, a female figure, walk across.
She sees the silhouette in the window.
Right. Yeah. And then of course we hear the conversation between Norman and Marion. He mentions, his mother several times. So she's aware that his mother is there. She's in the picture. She's living in the house. But at the same time, I didn't consider her being the murderer as an option, because I think we're all too busy as an audience freaking the fuck out that, like, basically the main character of the movie just died like 48 minutes into it. And that she got stabbed in the shower, that she got stabbed. Very little blood was shown. And just a culmination of all those things plus more, that we shouldn't really be able to pick up on logical things. Maybe I'm alone, but
no, I mean, I think it makes sense where it's kind of hard to process anything like rationally, after having just witnessed that. Like you see that, and I mean, I agree. I think you and Shauna both hit the nail on the head, where it's like, then you see a person in a dress walking out, and it, all indications are that it's Norma. You're like, what the fuck? Like, it's so much more insane.
Oh yeah. Like, what, she doesn't seem to be, up until that point, or even at that point, a viable option for the killer. I wouldn't have considered her in the running. And then she is, sort of.
I mean, just a second ago, we were talking about contrast, but contrast of another sort, up until this scene in this movie, most of the scenes have been kind of filmed like just from one single camera angle, and we have the camera kind of move with the people. Sometimes we get cuts from camera A to camera B or whatever, during 180 conversations, but for the most part we just have like a wide angle, like shot between two or more characters conversing. And then we get the stark contrast of this scene where it is very, very quick cuts, comparatively speaking, back and forth between the stabber and Marion's character, or Marion, where it's just, and it's back and forth, and between that and the like the score, it's just I don't know. I think that is a huge key player in what makes the movie and this particular scene so horrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, I'll agree 100%. The POV shots of the killer are like truly gruesome,
Yeah,
despite their relative lack of gore.
right. Yeah, for sure. Speaking of POV, one of the little trivia facts that I had down that I thought was really interesting. I mean, other people might be like, "Oh, okay, whatever," but like me, as like, I'm not going to call myself a filmmaker because I'm not. I, have dabbled in consumer level photography, but what uh, what I thought was interesting was Hitchcock had a 6 foot in diameter shower head made or constructed for this scene. I'm not exactly sure if it's in all scenes of or all parts of the shower scene, but he made it especially for the point of view shot of her, like her looking up at into the shower head. So if you were in the shower and you were to look straight into the water, um, he had to build it 6 feet in diameter because when the water shoots out of it, he needed the water to fully encompass the shot of the frame of the shot. But at the same time, it couldn't get any water on the lens or on the camera. The spray had to be large enough to accomplish both of those things. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And
Yeah,
and I
it is.
go ahead.
There's a couple little neat cinematography tricks like that.
Yeah.
One that I was always really fond of is that he had the camera outfitted with it was a 35 millimeter camera. I'm assuming, and he had it fitted with a 50 millimeter lens. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is it ties back into that theme of voyeurism because this movie doesn't really look like any other movie in that it looks like how you would see things through your eyes. And
Right.
the
Right.
reason he picked the 50 millimeter lens is because it's the
That's the
closest approximation to the human
to,
eye.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the 50 millimeter lens is probably my favorite lens that I've ever shot with. Like a lot of portrait photographers like to shoot with, especially like shooting scenes like this. Um, you want to use a zoom lens so you can like back up a little bit and get in tight, and you can have that bokeh blurred background effect. But like having that 50 millimeter lens, Ted, like you said, that's exactly right. Like 50 millimeters is supposed to be like true to your eye and what you see with very little distortion. So yeah, that is really interesting to accomplish that look and feel of a movie just by picking the kind of lens to use.
Any other words? Any other thoughts on the shower scene or any other scenes?
um I think I've talked just about all that I can talk on this particular scene. Um, it's fucking phenomenal. It holds up like a boss. But Shauna, any other thoughts on this particular scene or any others?
No, well, the only other thing I wanted to talk about with the shower scene, just briefly, is another really unsettling piece of it is that we don't when we see the killer, and we see that it's a woman, and we're thinking, okay, could this obviously this is Norma, could this be Norma or somebody else? Um, I struggled to find, and I still struggle, even though I've seen the movie a million times, um, the motive. When you first see her, what could she possibly what could possibly be her motive for murdering Marion in this way? And you think, could it be the money? Probably not. Is it a jealousy thing? Is she just crazy? And I think that that's what makes it so powerful is that there's no real motive at that
Right.
point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point, and it's not really one that is put together until the very end when
Right.
just that big divulgent thing of information where he kind of breaks down like yeah he was he became jealous of his mom when she found a male suitor and they started dating, and so he was kind of cast aside, comparatively speaking to their previous relationship, and so he felt so much remorse from his actions to murder her that she basically comes back you know in the form of a split personality. It's
Right.
yeah, super crazy to think about. Yeah, what else?
Um, the only other two things I really had were I wanted to just mention, and this is just notes. This isn't anything that we have to leave in the podcast. But the only other two things I really had to talk about were Anthony Perkins just fucking crushing it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then just kind of some of the other themes that we didn't cover as much.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know if y'all had anything else that you wanted to go on with or what.
No, we can touch on that stuff.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about how Anthony Perkins just fucking crushes this role
Yeah.
Yes, let's.
because he
Yeah.
does.
Yes, he crushes the role. I read that both him and I think it was who's the actress that plays Marion.
Janet Leigh.
Janet Leigh.
Yeah, thank you. That they were basically typecasted for the most part for the rest of their careers, but like till the end of their days, they didn't mind because of the cultural impact that movie had, and as well as the impact that it had on their careers. Like, I mean, I think. I know Lee was already, pretty popular up until that point. I mean, hell, she took a pay cut to be in his movie,
Right.
but they both had pretty successful careers after this, and um, and they were just super stoked to kind of be a part of, you know, this cultural horror landstone.
Yeah, of course, Janet Leigh would go on to become one of the most famous scream queens, uh,
Right.
and then of course her daughter would follow in those footsteps, Jamie
Right.
Lee.
Right.
Anthony Perkins is a very interesting study after this film because he would go on. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Not only did it typecast him, like it just completely. He became so synonymous with his character that he ended up doing 3 sequels,
Right.
Right.
starring as Norman Bates in all of them, and even directing the third one, I think. He was heavily involved in writing the fourth, which was made for TV, but he ultimately didn't direct it. I do believe he directed the third one.
Hmm.
So it just kind of became like synonymous with him,
Hmm.
which is interesting for a lot of reasons. But he by all accounts liked playing the character, and I'm sure he didn't make, or I'm sure he made a not insignificant amount of money doing it. So it's,
Right.
if for no other reason, he liked it for that. But I mean, you hit the nail on the head. This changed his life.
Yeah. Have either of you seen any of the sequels? I have not. Like,
Yes.
you have?
I have.
Are they anything to write home about?
No.
Yeah, definitely not a comparison with the original.
Right. Right.
I mean, I figured as much, or else naturally people would talk about them.
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was, Psycho 2 or Psycho 3, but in one of them, a good portion of the film is Norman talking to this like radio host, and he's talking to her on the phone, and it's just the weirdest thing, and it's like it tries to be very stylized, and it tries to get in your head and you get in his head, and I couldn't. I disliked both of I disliked 2 and 3, and they can't compare. But I don't even if they were, I don't know, given their own, like even away from Psycho, they can't hold up. Like
So
Right.
it's not like the Halloween sequels where the first one is amazing and then the rest of them are like, okay, this is okay, and then they just get bad. Like they just immediately nosedive.
Absolutely, 100%. For me, I wouldn't see them.
I mean,
Either.
the newest Halloween movie, like I thought that one was great. I mean, yes, it still pales in comparison to the original, of course, but I thought it held its own pretty well.
Yeah, I should have been clearer. I was talking more about like Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Halloween
Yes.
4, etc.
Yeah,
Right.
what is the third one? Like Year of the Witch or Year of the
Season of the
Oh my
Witch?
Witch,
god.
yeah.
Yeah, you were right.
Which,
It had nothing to do with Michael Myers.
okay, but hear me out. If it weren't called Halloween, that's a pretty solid movie.
Yeah, you think
You
so?
know,
Yeah,
yeah, aspects of it, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's interesting for sure.
It's a good concept. It's
Yeah,
poorly executed. It's a good concept. It's poorly executed, and it shouldn't have been called Halloween.
right.
But other than that, I think it's a fairly solid '80s horror film.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. It just doesn't belong with the rest of the franchise, and it's almost insulting that that's what they call it. So
Yeah, it's kind of like Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. I mean, like, yeah, you're gonna throw Dom in the post credit scene just to be like, yeah, it definitely ties in with the rest of the Fast and Furious movie because
I'm
here's
pretty
Dom.
convinced. I think that was one of those movies that they were like, this won't sell unless it has a franchise attached to it.
right,
Right,
right. I
Y-
agree. Yeah.
right, because it would just cower in the shadow of Fast and Furious. Like when they tried to do Need for Speed. Like, I mean, they thought that they might get some points by throwing Aaron Paul in there, but and
He's never going to be a thing. He's not. He was very good as Jesse. That's what he's going to be.
I mean, he has been in a lot of other stuff that you haven't watched, but and just because you haven't watched it doesn't mean it's not popular. A lot
Right,
of
but
people love him in BoJack Horseman. Like
I
he's
like
great in that.
BoJack Horseman, but my point is, if you ask the average person who he is, it's Jesse from Breaking Bad.
Sure. Okay.
That's not a
Well,
knock. I'm just saying he's tied to that character.
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's. I mean, sorry. I was. I mispicked up on the point that you were trying to make. That's my bad.
No, it's okay.
But yeah. Anyways, I don't know how we got from fucking Psycho to Tokyo Drift.
No one knows. It's provocative. But yeah,
Gets the
I mean,
people going.
Anthony Perkins is he's killer. He does so many little things in this film. Like I said, the subtle hesitation before he picks the room where he's gonna spy on her.
Right. Yeah, that
Um,
one made me kind of like do a double take almost cuz it's one of those little things like you said that you just kind of forget about like or you just kind of you notice like wait, did he do that? Like did he really like almost reach for another key but intentionally chose one over the other? Yeah, it's just one of those weird little things.
yeah. When he's being interviewed, so to speak, by Abergast, and he starts out and he's very calm and cool, and then he starts, getting his stories mixed up, and he's got to try and cover his tracks, and
Right, yeah.
Abergast starts realizing that there's more going on than you know Bates is letting on. There's just so many good little performance ticks that Anthony Perkins has in this that I feel like probably don't get as much credit as they should.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and I
agree.
think, yeah, and Shauna, you'll probably agree with this. Like, I feel like that's just the aging of this movie, like, and the way that acting in those particular scenes was kind of done, and sometimes not done. Back in those days, it just like I was watching it, and I was trying to figure out if it was just me or if some of the one-on-one performances were kind of like a little clunky, like they just felt not forced, but I just felt ham-fisted maybe. And I realized that that was just kind of like the acting style or part of the acting style back in the 50s and 60s. Um, and so it's kind of something that I've kind of grown to appreciate.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why you kind of have to it's it's awesome to go back and to rewatch movies like this that are clearly from a different era, or to watch them for the first time. But you got to consider the time, because
Right.
otherwise so many things get lost with our current culture. Even the way that Anthony Perkins eats whatever he's eating, like those nuts or something, he's like,
Candy corn.
okay,
Candy corn. Yeah.
So even the way he's eating the candy corn is, I mean, it's so provocative.
Off-putting?
Well, it is. It's creepy. It's weird. And, so many times I've put myself in Marion Crane's shoes and thought, I mean, would I have found this behavior odd? Would I have spent the
Right.
night? Would I have decided to take a shower instead of, I don't know, being dirty for a night or whatever? I mean, there are so many things. Would I have had a sandwich with the guy or sat down with his birds or whatever? And he just seems like such a nice, normal guy, and yet like such a creep. And
I
Anthony
know.
Perkins is just like the perfect embodiment of both things.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's a perfect, like, analogy or comparison, where you're just like, you try and put yourself in that person's shoes and be like, okay, I'm not me, I'm this other person. What do you think I would do as this person? And yeah, it's I mean, like, I feel like part of you would almost be like a little relieved to be in this position. Like, maybe he comes off a little creepy, but it's probably just, that like homeschool kid innocence where they didn't have a
Right.
lot of social interaction. It was, and yes, I'm stereotyping um, the whole homeschooling thing. Obviously, a lot of things have changed with that. So just as an aside, um, but yeah, like he definitely has the innocence where it kind of feels creepy, but it's probably just that homegrown feeling. And
Well, he's
yeah,
probably not experienced with women, and
right.
he lives with his mom, and he's running this kind of off the beaten path motel, and so
That
there's all these.
obviously doesn't get very many guests.
Right, yeah. Exactly. He could be 15, he could be 25, we don't know. I mean, he has
Yeah,
such a boy-like, childlike innocence that you chalk it off as harmless, but yet
right.
he's also very creepy. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a little
exactly.
backwards.
He's
Yeah.
like a proto nice guy.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. um well, what else? Do we go over all the trivia? I mean, Shauna, you kind of mentioned a little bit about the birds.
Yeah.
Do you have in your trivia, like, um, it, what the whole bird theme could possibly represent? All these taxidermied birds. The fact that it's in Phoenix, Arizona.
Hmm.
That um, you know anyway, they're your notes, so I'll let you explain them.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, clearly Hitchcock has a thing with birds,
Hmm.
especially if you've seen The Birds,
Yes.
which I highly recommend.
Also a
Yeah.
great movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic movie. Might be my favorite over Psycho. I'm not sure. They're both a little bit different and equally
That is
terrifying.
a hot take.
Hmm.
I
I'm not
just
saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I don't think I've ever heard that.
I feel very strongly about The Birds. I think we should have another episode about it. I think that would be great. But so I I pull from that movie too. When and reference that movie when I think about Psycho as well. Just that strong bird theme. But here's Norman, like, who does taxidermy, which is this like lost art. I don't know. Maybe people still do it. I'm not really sure.
I
But
think they do.
okay, well, they do. All right, they do, and he does it with just birds. which,
Mhm.
okay, he likes birds, but there's that theme of birds, the bird throughout the film too. And even I think of like an eagle eye or looking through the eyes of a hawk. We get to see, I think, some of those views that Hitchcock deliberately, some of those camera angles remind me of what I would see if I had eagle eyes, or was looking at it through the eyes of a hawk, or um, it feels very like all knowing, and all seeing, I
Hmm.
guess. Because I feel like birds are always there and always watching. So I feel like that's kind of part of it too. And then, of course, the more obvious things like Marion Crane. And like you said,
Mhm.
Dave, Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's definitely a strong bird theme. But I think that was a very intentional, even, referencing Hitchcock's other movie, The Birds. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, Also, I didn't realize that it could rain like that in Phoenix. She basically has to pull over to the motel because it's raining so hard, right? So
Well,
like,
she's not in Phoenix at that point. She's.
oh, okay.
I don't know if it. I don't know if it's explicitly named like where they are exactly.
Hmm.
But I'm assuming it's somewhere along the California Arizona border.
Okay. Gotcha.
Maybe a little further than that because she's already driven for a day. Which Phoenix and Los Angeles aren't that far apart. I don't know why it takes her like a fucking weekend to get there.
Right. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's basically a straight shot, and it's what, like 3 or 4 hours,
It's
maybe?
longer than that. I've driven it. It's 6 hours on the highway, on the interstate.
Okay.
So I can understand like it's going to take longer than that in a car in 1960 doing 40 miles an hour. But like 3 days, really? like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah. But jokes aside, I think you hit the nail on the head, Shauna, with the birds as a repeated motif or theme.
Hmm.
Um, he even mentions that Marion eats like a bird.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes, yes.
Um,
I mean, I remember that line, but I totally didn't even pick up on that relation. Holy shit.
yeah. Um, and to me, it kind of plays into some of Hitchcock's other themes or larger themes that he would revisit throughout most of his career, um, particularly just isolation and duality.
Hmm.
If you look at birds, they're free. They fly around, they do whatever they want. All the characters in this movie are trapped in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marion's trapped because she made the decision to steal the money. Norman is trapped because he's a psycho, essentially.
Right.
All of the main characters are trapped in some way. They may not start out that way, like with Abergast, but he ends up that way, trapped and
Right.
then murdered. Another interesting thing is, Norman stuffs birds and then says Marion eats like a bird, but then admits he doesn't know much about them when they're alive.
Right.
Right.
Which, again, Marion Crane, she gonna die, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So given that the autism diagnosis wasn't thrown around, or being given as often as it is today as it was back then, I do believe it had been coined at this point in time, by the 60s. But Bates kind of like threw some ASD flags, that I feel like I kind of picked up on, like that part. Like it's a pretty relatively common trait with individuals with ASD to know a lot about one particular topic, or like one facet of one topic, but you ask them to like make a recommendation for something, and then they like shut down, like they don't know, and then they like kind of get angry at you, but it's like internalized anger at themselves that they don't know. So it was just one of those weird things that I kind of like picked up on. And of course that's just because I am, I've had my nose deep in, autism awareness stuff lately. But anyways, that's just a quick aside.
Well, definitely. I mean, Norman is so quick to change his behavior. Like, and that's really scary. And that kind of throws you off too, because he should just be subdued and shy and awkward, and he shouldn't have like he shouldn't get upset at any of the characters, and he shouldn't get defensive. I mean, it seems like out of character for him to exhibit some of those traits.
Yeah.
You know, when which he shows that side with several interactions with other characters in the movie. So I think that is important to note, that change in behavior, because it is very obvious.
Yeah, I think the easiest one to point to is the first one with Marion, where the second she mentions sending his mother away, he changes.
Yeah.
He becomes very
Yes.
belligerent and agitated.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. And like what's interesting is like I don't know if nursing homes and what was the word that he used, like
Oh,
an
like
asylum, or
yeah.
it was something very, very different than what we would consider a nursing home. And so what I thought was interesting is that it seemed like the word that was going to come out of her mouth was like a home or nursing home. But when he tried to finish her sentence by saying, whatever he did, it was, like we were saying, it's the farthest from an actual nursing home. Like, it's synonymous with like, a nut house, psychiatric hospital. So yeah, that was just another weird thing that I was kind of like, yeah, that's not what I was picturing she was going to say.
Yeah, I always wondered if that was a little bit of a nod to the fact that he had spent some time in a place like that.
I feel that was my thought. Like, that was my only explanation that I could come up with, was that, he had already spent some time.
He seemed pretty familiar with it. And I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to say that that's like the concept of an asylum is so foreign to the average person that nobody would have known that. But just, it seems like a
Right.
pretty deliberate way to frame it, that he's
Yeah,
got
exactly.
some intimate knowledge about it.
And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that in Psycho 2 or 3, they do talk about Norman being in some sort of institution and how he's like been reformed, but he can't escape who he really is. So this could have been, he could have already been in some sort of institution like that in Psycho, and I can't remember if they talk about it too much more in 2 or 3, but I know that they do reference that he has been in an institution, and
Right.
that he's reformed. So
yeah. Well, guys, I mean, we've talked about this movie for almost 2 hours.
wow.
Yeah. Is there any final thoughts that anyone wants to throw out? I mean, I'll throw out that, first of all, if you're listening to this and you haven't heard or haven't watched Psycho, and you made it this far, like, okay, so we just spoiled the movie for you, so that sucks. But we gave you fair warning, but you should still see the fucking movie, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
it is.
It's a classic.
Yeah, it is the definition of a classic horror movie. So, yeah, I highly recommend it to anyone, and everyone to go see.
At any age.
Right.
But
Shauna is her tales of speaking from experience, getting exposed to horror at a very early age always fascinates me. Like, it's always fun to hear her talk about it. Like, and that's actually a good plug or callback or whatever you want to call it to the first episode that she was on. Like Ted said in the intro, it was appropriately, but I guess I forget what you said, like boringly named horror movies. Yeah, it was just called Horror Movies with Shauna Hoyt.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't need more than that, No,
yeah,
but Well, I just want to say that when I had my first child, when I was pregnant with my first child, my mom said to me, whatever you do, please do not let your children watch horror movies like your dad made you and your sister. And I was so offended by that because I mean, it made me who I am. And I have this
Exactly.
appreciation that I I probably wouldn't have had. So, you know, that's probably the one and only time my mom ever tried to tell me how to parent my children. But I will never forget that. And I do occasionally try to force certain movies on my kids.
Yes, as you should.
As is the healthy thing to do. So, yeah.
Right. No, I mean, and we've actually talked about that a little bit before in the past. I think on that particular episode, the correlation between people that love the horror genre more than any other genre, and the relationship between that and how well adjusted they are, just in general, is a very interesting concept. I mean, I think the three of us are combined have a pretty healthy dose of exposure to everything from horror, suspense, thriller, sci-fi, action, everything on a very intense scale. And to say that we're, relatively well adjusted, I think is safe to say. I don't want to put words in Ted's mouth, but
But Ted is well adjusted.
I think so. I think so. I mean, like I said, I don't want to, put words in his mouth or anything, but
well, this is fun.
Yeah. I just have one final thought on it, and then I'll, turn the mic off and shut up because God knows I've talked too much already. But ultimately, I think what makes this movie effective is Hitchcock's ability to show this darkness that lurks kind of just behind or just within polite society. Basically, all the characters in this film are gross in some way or the other. Some to a greater extent, obviously. But we see Marion, and she almost immediately steals a large sum of money. She and Sam are sneaking around and having a sexual relationship outside of wedlock, which, again, I'm not passing judgment, but that's very scandalous to the time.
Yes, very much so.
Her coworker Caroline has a purse full of fucking tranquilizers.
God, yeah. When she said that shit, I was like, "What did she just fucking say?"
Yeah, I was like, "Damn, she's really just taking fucking ketamine like it's the thing to do."
Right? She's like, "I got some Quaaludes and ayahuasca in the break room.
If
you're
you guys want to do
interested,
some gorilla biscuits,
right? Y'all want to get real fucked up and meet Jesus?"
Yeah. And then of course, you have Norman, and
Right.
he was a master of things like this. I mean, we still talk about his movies. He's still revered as a director. He's been dead for 40 years, and people still talk about him as one of, if not the greatest. So,
Yeah,
it's just a fantastic film. Despite it being horrifying in a lot of different ways, it's still like I said, it's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
100%.
And you're right. It says so much about society. It's very much relevant to really any time, including today.
Yeah, it does kind of have that timeless feel to it.
It really does. So it's for all the ages. So
Exactly. Yes. For all the ages and the viewers' ages. Like, expose your 3-year-old to this business.
Much like the Wu-Tang Clan, Psycho is for the children.
Exactly.
I think that's a good place to put a bow on it, is just with a random Wu-Tang reference. Random but much needed. So thank you, good sir. So like always, congratulations if you have made it this far. Also, I'm very sorry. If you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, we would very much love you to do so. That way you can stay up to date with new episodes, typically every Wednesday. Sometimes we take a break, but typically they're every Wednesday. We're on all the podcast apps, platforms, websites, what have you. If there's a podcast platform, we're most likely on it. And yes, we are on Spotify and YouTube for the people that are curious. You can find us at geekgaragepodcast.com. You'll leave a rating and review where applicable, I guess. There's not a whole lot of apps that let you leave ratings and reviews, but regardless, find us on social media. Like I said in the intro, we have our new fancy Facebook group where we have all kinds of interesting chats and conversations, discussions, randomly throughout the week. I try and throw them out there when things get quiet, and I'm like, hey, let's stir the shit pot, as they say, and see what we can pull out of here. So yeah, definitely check us out on Facebook if you're into participating in that. But yeah, I guess I was about to do the cheesecake sign off line, but this is a movies episode. Ted, you want to hit us with the sign off line?
Yeah, do the movies thing.
Yes, there you go. Do the movies thing. Watch more movies because movies make life better.
Yep, that's it.
Yes, that is the sub line. That used to be the headline of the sign off line, but then we switched it because for a while we couldn't remember. I feel like we've explained this several times.
Yes, explaining the joke always makes it funnier. Thank you, Shauna, for joining us. We appreciate you allowing us to waste 2 hours of your time knowing that you could do anything literally else and have a better time at it. So thank you, as always, for joining us. And she's already left. So she got out while the getting was good.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, there you are. We just heard radio silence, like nothing. We're like, oh, she's dead. Were you laughing?
No, I don't know.
He was probably shocked that I said something nice.
I think you're right there, buddy.
Thank you, guys. I had an awesome time as usual, and I look forward to.
Podcast is over. You don't have to lie to us anymore. It's fine.
No, thank you so much for being on. The pleasure is all ours, of course. It's always fantastic and wonderful to have you on our horror themed episodes, because we definitely consider you an authority voice figure in this genre. So we appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, that'll do it. Do the movies thing. And we'll catch you on the flippity flip. Bye.
Bye.